kind of a big deal for me. I think it is for everybody else here too. This is a big thing in this community. I grew up here. I grew up in Fayetteville, so it's kind of like coming home. Yeah. I grew up a Christian, and I was very active in my church. I was an acolyte. I was the president of the youth group. My dad was an usher, an elder, the treasurer of the church. My mom was a Sunday school teacher. I was always at church. So I've come full circle, not even full circle, I guess I've flipped the coin, so to speak. I thought a good subtitle would be The Out-of-Body Voyage of the Shaman and How It Has Evolved in the Religions and Myths of the World. That is the footprints of the shaman. Shamanism has virtually been stomped out, and all that's left is some folklore that has been hidden in artwork and mythology, and a lot of people, it's right in front of your face, and you don't even see it, but it's right there. So as I said, I grew up in Usher, was very active in the church. One of my duties was, being young and spry, I guess, I was going along with the elders in the church, and we would go to the liquor store of all places, and at the same place where you can buy a carton of smokes, a bottle of tequila, and a porno magazine, we would go buy the blood of Christ and bring it back to church. And at some point between the tattooed atheist salesman and the altar at my church, that wine was converted into something that was supposed to be a spiritual experience. And we would order the snacks that you would get at communion. It was a snack for me because when I would go back into the usher's booth to change into this silly outfit that we would wear to light the candles, I would grab some of these and eat them, and nothing happened. And that was something that was kind of weird for me because I would sit in the pews and I would sit behind the preacher, and people would come up and do the communion, and they would be all solemn and serious and like something had happened. They ate something and had this experience, and when you finally get to the age where you can participate in this, nothing happens. I was really let down. So you went to this confirmation, and everything seemed to rely on faith. You take and eat this thing, and you take and drink this stuff, and if your faith is strong enough, great. Hopefully you get this spiritual, religious experience. That wasn't the case for me. I had to wait until I was in college to have that experience. And 5 dry grams of psilocybe cubensis, and next thing you know, I was sitting on the porch of my friend's house, and I thought, well, I'm not so naive to think that I'm the first one to have such an experience, and I know that these mushrooms aren't new, so maybe there's a connection between this take and eat and the actual communion experience. And as I started to study this stuff, I realized that there were 3 degrees of initiation through all of this process. You have this outer circle here, the faded blue area there, where it's like you're looking at everything and kind of curious as about what this experience could be, sitting in the congregation of the church, participating in communion. And then you get into the inner circle where the priests are, and hopefully they know that this isn't the real deal. And then there's the point within the circle, and the point within the circle are us. We realize that there's a lot more to this cracker than what is cracked up to be. So I kind of feel like I'm preaching to the choir because I've met so many of you in the last day that a lot of you know this material, so that's kind of comforting to me. So for me, this faith-based religion was a dead end. I felt as though I was being blindfolded and led down this dark alley and asked to wait at a dead end patiently with faith for the apocalypse. And that may be great for some people. They seem to really like to do that. I think we're all looking for the actual experience. So faith really isn't in the cards. If you have to believe it, it isn't real. And that's the big difference between religion, modern day religion, it's 2,000 years old, but modern day Christianity and shamanism. For the shaman, it's head first, down the rabbit hole, and for the first timers, you don't know what's going to happen. Even those of us who have had the experience, sometimes we forget the essence of it and we just don't know what's going to happen until it happens, and then there's this, oh yeah, this is it. That's great. So there's no belief required. You don't need belief. The shaman doesn't require belief at all, whatsoever. The medicine man is a plant-based medicine man. The shaman is a plant-based medicine man. Plants have been responsible for food, clothing, shelter, all of our needs, and tools and fuels and things like this. But there's also been this inebriation quality that gets overlooked when it comes to how important plants are. This is AK-47. AK-47? So this predates alcohol even. So those you think of getting inebriated, this is inebriation as opposed to intoxication. Something that, cannabis is non-toxic, whereas you're really doing damage to yourself with alcohol. So this shamanism predates alcohol, and it's linked to alcohol, but it's older than that. It plays a central role in shamanism. We think of entheogens or psychedelics. People don't like entheogens because that requires a theos or a religious aspect. But that's really what happened to me personally. I had a spiritual awakening, whereas growing up in such an indoctrinated religious mindset, this is what I was looking for personally. So I like to call them entheogens. Some people don't really like that. So what I got into was occult ethnomycology. When I talk about occult to some people, they make a weird face, and it's kind of difficult to explain, but the occult simply means hidden. When you study the occult, you're studying those things which are hidden. So when you think of the Gospels that didn't quite make it into the Bible, well, that's the occult on that level. Occult mythology would be mythology that's been suppressed. I guess all of mythology has that's what mythology is stories that you can't speak directly about. So that's the shamanic experience, the shamanic consciousness. I think I might have gone one slide ahead. So in the 60s, LSD was dropped in our laps. We didn't really know what to do with it. I wasn't alive, but we had this consciousness awakening experience, and it kind of happened, I don't want to say accidentally, but it was only the doctors, PhDs, and things like that, they seemed to be doing the talking, where everyone else was just saying, there's something groovy, man, go try this and listen to that. And today we have direction. Today we have those who have come before us. If you haven't ever heard of Terence McKenna, write this name down, go directly to your computer and look him up. His words will change your life. It did for me. He used to say, if the truth can be told so as to be understood, it will be believed. And this is the only belief system that I believe in, is something that is so crystal clear that you have no choice but to believe. And that requires, again, no faith whatsoever. I see shamanism as a great tree, and religion as its branches. And the only way, if you find yourself out on one of these branches, the only way back to the root of it all is to chop these branches that are based in faith off one at a time until you find yourself back at the source. And only then can you go higher. And I find myself thinking, well, shamanism has to be the source, because so few people know what shamanism is and what shamanism is about. So you find yourself backtracking through the same path that you found yourself walking until you understand that it's all bullshit, and you find yourself walking the right path. I'll show this slide again at the end, and I think it might make a little more sense after this talk. So the mystery schools had it. There were no congregations with the ancient mystery schools. The ancient mystery schools, you're not welcome unless you're initiated, and their initiations were usually plant-based. These are the mysteries of Eleusis or Eleusis. And what are they holding? Looks like mushrooms to me. Some people argue differently, but that looks pretty clear to me. This is Persephone and Demeter. The best way that I've found to discuss shamanism, as crazy as it may sound if you've never heard this stuff, is with Christmas and Santa Claus. And that sounds nuts, but Jesus and Santa Claus, one of them is real and one of them wasn't, and I'll leave you to decide who is who. In the Middle Ages, Santa Claus was a shaman. The shamans in Siberia, mostly, they were nomadic. They herd reindeer, and they would migrate with the reindeer. They lived in a symbiotic relationship with the reindeer. They would use the reindeer would use them for food, and so forth. So they lived kind of in a balance with the reindeer. So as I say, when they would migrate, the shaman would migrate with them, and in doing so, they had to take their house with them. And these houses are called yurts, and they're portable. So that's what the top left is. And there they are with their reindeer. And this is the first connection to shamanism. Now these little things, I'm sure that you've all seen this mushroom before tonight, whether it's been in video games or cartoons or you name it. This is the archetypal mushroom when you think of shrooms, the little red and white mushrooms. And they exist in nature, the Amanita muscaria, the fly agaric mushroom. They also grow in a symbiotic relationship. So the shaman would live in a symbiotic relationship with the reindeer. These mushrooms aren't parasites. They live in a symbiotic relationship with a tree. And I'll get to that again in a minute. So here's some of the footprints of the shaman that have made it to our present from their past. It's as though they've projected this as they've been hunted and killed and considered witches and so forth. They've left in their wake clues for us to find their source. Again, the Christmas tradition. These are all some of the oldest Christmas ornaments that you can find are this little Amanita muscaria mushroom. They're collector's items for some people. If you go to eBay and do a search for red mushroom Christmas ornament, they're not cheap. I don't have any. Here's a few pictures of Santa Claus and little toys that you can find that link us even further into Christmas and the Amanita muscaria mushroom. In Malaysia, there's a mall, and they don't hide this at all. The Amanita lives with the roots. They grow from the roots of pine trees, other trees, birch, larch, cedar, oak. So, as I say, they live in a symbiotic relationship with the trees. They attach themselves to the roots, and just as nature needs a tree to grow an apple, nature also needs a tree to grow these mushrooms. You can't take one of these and plant it somewhere and hope for the best. You're not going to find spore prints of this mushroom. It's very, very difficult to cultivate. So you have to go into nature and find them. And finding these mushrooms, I'll talk about in just a minute. They flourish under pine trees. So you'll find them under pine trees, usually in the rainy seasons. So back to Siberia for a second. Siberia is littered with pine trees and snow. And so these mushrooms are very tough. They can push up through some of the most hard soil, and they'll even grow in the snow. But for the shaman, when you think of Russia and inebriation or intoxication, you think of perhaps vodka. Now, vodka, as I said, this stuff predates alcohol, but vodka is a very heavy commodity. You're not going to find a nomad carrying around tubs of their alcohol. the best way for them, I mean, we've been getting out of our heads for as long as we've had consciousness. So for them, the easiest method was this mushroom. And they don't lug around wet mushrooms either. They're dried, and I'll talk about that in a second too. They get to be very large. So if you think of a shaman out in the forest collecting these things, the best way for them to do this is to dry them out on location. When you dry these mushrooms, they get more potent. They get more potent, and you can eat more. The wet mushroom, of course, that's only common sense. You can eat more of a dried mushroom than a wet one. So they're lighter, they're more potent, and they're easier to consume. They go through a process called decarboxylation. And if you do a little research, you'll see just why. There's, I think it's ibotenic acid turns into mucimol, and mucimol is the active ingredient of the mushroom. And there's another way to get this mucimol that I'll mention in a second that's quite controversial. So the shaman's going to find a tree in a central location and find a flush of these mushrooms. And as big as they get, they're going to dry them out on location. Now the best way to do this is to find a tree and take the mushrooms, the wet mushrooms, and hang them on the tree. And this will prevent reindeer from eating the mushroom. The reindeer love this mushroom. They'll knock the shaman over to get to the mushrooms first. And so you take the mushroom, you hang it on the tree, and you go find more, and when you get finished with your day, you have some dried amanitas to take home in your little bag. So this has turned into decorating the tree. These are some of the footprints that the shamans have left in their wake. So in smaller quantities, say you just want to go get some for your friends and family, you might bring them home wet. Now, to roast these, the best way to do it, the oldest method, is to throw them in your socks, hang them over the fireplace to dry. Tomorrow morning, guess what? You've got your substance. So you have the stockings hanging over the hearth of the fireplace. You have the decorated Christmas tree. You have the magical gifts that grow only under these trees in nature. Back to the shaman's dwelling for a second. The nomadic shamans would have these yurts, and the only way into the yurt would be through the smoke hole. They left the hole open, and that they would climb in and out. And they wouldn't normally just climb a rope and get in. When it snows in Russia, it really snows in Russia. So it's easy just to walk up to your yurt and plop right down into the middle. And this even brings about the idea of little tiny reindeer and their footprints on your roof. Here's this smoke hole in the center of the yurt. This is one that you can buy. This is a modern day yurt, but that shows the smoke hole entrance and exit. Another thing that the shaman would do would be to dress in the colors of their sacred quote-unquote plant. Mushrooms aren't plants, but sacred plants, mushrooms, it all kind of falls into the same category. So they would dress in the colors of their plant. They would become this entheogen, dressing like it, ingesting it, and taking on the role of becoming the plant. So they would dress in the colors. This is a shamaness, a Russian shaman dressing in the colors of the mushroom. So now we have the red and white wise man. You think of a wise man with a big beard. Great. Okay, so there's Santa Claus. The connection to the stockings hanging over the fireplace, the decorations, the reindeer, all of it linked to Siberia, the Russian shaman. And we celebrate this oddly every year, and so few people question, why am I bringing a tree into my house? But this is the origin of that. And it's also left its mark in Easter. As I mentioned earlier, finding these mushrooms is you don't grow them, you find them. So going out on this Easter egg hunt and looking for these colorful egg-like mushrooms, collecting them in a basket, they're not always easy to find. I think I showed 2 slides of mushrooms just growing like crazy underneath trees. That's a lucky day. That's a day that you remember. Sometimes you don't find them and they're right in front of you. So you think of this idea of an Easter egg hunt, a spring festival of finding the mushrooms, gathering them for your family, for your community. This is just a slide of a little egg in a nest. Only it's not an egg, it's an amanita. The colorful Easter eggs could be where we get the idea of coloring eggs. And who better to go gather these mushrooms than little children who can scurry up underneath all of the shrubbery and find the mushrooms. Don't find us the wrong ones, bring us the right ones, and perhaps whoever collects the most will get a treat at the end of the day. So shamanism, Russian shamanism, has left its mark in our traditions today. And for those of you who grew up Christian, let's talk about the forbidden fruit. This is an apple. And if you've ever wondered why Adam and Eve ate an apple when we're encouraged to eat an apple a day, an apple is obviously not the forbidden fruit. It is a symbol for something. The apples are red. Some of them have little white spots on them. And the apple is a perfect symbolic representation of the Amanita muscaria mushroom. The Amanita is the hidden fruit of the tree. You take a bite into an apple, it's white on the inside. You take a bite of the Amanita, it's white on the inside. The apple and the mushroom are just, it's an ideal symbol for the Amanita. In Song of Solomon, there's a interesting quote, like an apple tree among the trees of the forest. And that's exactly where you will find the Amanita. Go into the forest and look for an apple tree, and voila, you found it. This is a painting on the ceiling of the Hildesheim Museum in Germany. What's interesting about this is not the obvious. To me, this is the interesting part. It's a fantastic image in itself, but the little spears that Adam and Eve are eating are raised bumps in the ceiling. They're not just paint on the ceiling. So the Amanita has the little raised bumps. So the artist knows the occult art well enough to depict this, to hide it for us to discover. My wife Jennifer and I went to France, and kind of a funny story. We went to Plaincourant, France, and we found this chapel. A lot of you have probably seen this picture before. It was in Allegro's book. It was in Lawson's book. And it's Adam and Eve standing on either side of this Amanita mushroom. And some people debated, well, this isn't a mushroom. This was a stylized tree, and this is the way that they would draw the trees back then. And okay, I keep that in the back of my mind. And we show up at this chapel, and it's in the middle of the day, the week, and nobody's there. So I find myself running to this castle next door with a sign that says Plaincourant this direction, and these kids are playing in the yard, and I'm waving my hand to the parents, and I'm like, who can we take a look inside? We've only traveled 4,000 miles for this. So the owner comes over and says, sure, let's go have a look. And we kind of had a language barrier between us, but they were guaranteeing us that it was indeed a mushroom. So let there be no doubt that this is not a stylized tree of any kind. This is the Amanita, Adam and Eve. The people that did this fresco were fleeing from the Crusades, so they had a secret to keep, and this is how they do it. They hide it in their artwork, and this is how it's been done forever. More occult artwork. God so loved the world, gave his only begotten Son. Well, before the birth of Christ, there was the Christ that lived in heaven. Well, here he is, the cosmic Christ, holding who? An anthropomorphized Amanita muscaria. And what's fascinating about this is when the Amanita grows, it has a annulus that's connected to the bottom of the mushroom. And when the annulus drops, when the skirt drops of the mushroom, it releases its spores. Well, the artist was clever enough to include the skirt of the mushroom and these little hash marks at the bottom as well. So they were very clever. Initiated artists are always fun to look at. In the British Museum, this is from the Canterbury Psalter. This is the popular image circling around the internet. Actually, this is just one pane. There's a better one. I see the Amanita, psilocybe, perhaps Syrian rue, and maybe opium.
So, and could this be a cactus? Opening the third eye. You never know what the artist is thinking. They're long since passed away. It'd be nice to ask them. In alchemy is the art of hiding symbols in their artwork. Alchemy is a language in itself. One of the key principles in creating the Philosopher's Stone is the Amanita muscaria mushroom. So when you look into alchemy, you see these things quite a bit. Clark Heinrich has a really good book. It used to be called Strange Fruit. He's changed the title to Magic Mushrooms in Religion and Alchemy. I recommend this book to everybody that's interested in this stuff. Here is Sol and Luna, the sun and the moon. The sun on top and the moon, the red and white, Sol and Luna. Split the Amanita down the center and it reveals its feathers, its wings, its red and white wings. There's the annulus that drops, the little skirt that drops, and if you noticed, it's decorated in gold. So here's the skirt that drops and it's decorated with gold. The mirror that he's holding here is this is all just my opinion. I could be totally wrong, but to me this is obvious. The mirror in my mind is the reflection that you have upon yourself when you have this experience. It's like staring your deep, darkest secrets, looking right in the mirror and seeing your true self. It's also an eclipse. Sol and Luna, this is astrotheology, archaeoastronomy. Sol and Luna is an eclipse when they pass over and one in front of the other. So you have that, and then we could of course see a mushroom cap in this as well. And what are they holding? It's the cosmic egg, but in my mind it's also the way that their fingers are placed over this. It's a very clever way of hiding mushroom imagery in this as well. So here are the growth cycle of the mushroom, the little egg, and how it grows into the dumbbell stage and it drops its skirt, so to speak. I don't know how this picture got in here. Popes and cardinals love to dress like the Amanita. If you've ever seen them in the internet or on TV, they look like mushrooms walking around. And it's really nice to see a bunch of them all at once walking in a flush. But the cardinal in the church dresses like the Amanita. The cardinal in nature is a red bird, and that's where I'm leading. The red bird is the phoenix. And the phoenix in the stories, the way the story goes, the phoenix is born from its own ashes, and it will never live to leave its nest. For as it lifts its wings and attempts to fly, it bursts into flames and engulfs itself, leaving nothing behind but its own ashes, and the cycle continues. So to think about the phoenix as the Amanita, the phoenix is born from its own ashes, so the ashes would be the spores of the mushroom that drop. The old mushroom is dead, it decomposes, and the new mushroom is born in its own, the same nest over and over again. Will never live to leave its nest, for as it lifts its wings and attempts to fly. So here's the mushroom in its holy grail mushroom cup stage. As it will burst into flames, it turns red and bursts into flames. Here's some more wings of the mushroom. I got these images from Clark Heinrich. It leaves nothing behind but its own ashes. It rots in its own footstep, so to speak. So the Amanita is the phoenix. More ashes. This is difficult to see here tonight, but this is just sprinkled with spores. These are pine needles from the forest. So, I think this is a good picture too. It kind of looks like a bird protecting its egg, sort of. So, I mentioned the controversial way to ingest muscimol. After the mushroom is consumed, your body works like a filter. So if you recycle this, if you think of the Ouroboros serpent in alchemy, you recycle the urine, the experience gets more and more intense. And I've heard stories of shaman going days or weeks at a time just on one dose of the mushroom and keeping this recycling going. So fountains in history were often used as drinking sources, and to put a little homunculus or little man on a fountain urinating into the water isn't a sick joke. It's a way of hiding the secret of alchemy in a public place. The best way to hide something is to stick it under people's noses, like the Christmas story. People just don't ask questions. Here's a guy pissing into our water. Why is he doing that? As I said before, alchemy is an art in itself. It's a language in itself. And if you learn to speak through art, you can talk to people in the future and ignore the people in the present. And that's what these people have done. There's 2 different kinds of urine, 2 different kinds of water. Another image from alchemy, Mount Helicon, the mushroom man with what at the top? A tree and 2 different kinds of water. This is Titan's Bacchanal of the Andreans. All wine was mixed wine until there was a Wine Purification Act. This today wine is regulated. Back in the good old days it wasn't. All wine was mixed with something more intoxicating than just alcohol. So here's the homunculus again, and he's urinating into a river of wine. This man is scooping it up into a pitcher, and everyone is drinking it. And it seems as though the shaman at the top of the hill has had a larger dose than the rest of the group. These kind of plants they have the different degrees of initiation as well. You can have the recreational, go to a rave kind of experience, or you can have the out-of-body experience with the shaman, which isn't recommended to go anywhere other than maybe your own bed. So walking around and standing up is not an option on the higher doses of any entheogen. At least it's not recommended. Here's the Amanita again in a table stage. This is the later growth cycle of the mushroom. It grows to be a round table, and then it begins to curl and curl into a cup, into a holy grail. Here's the skirt that drops. So when this happens in nature, of course it all happens in nature, the dew in the morning will come. And when this dew collects in the mushroom, you can see that this turns from a bright red color to a golden chalice. And it collects this water that looks a lot like blood in its own cup. So you could not only take and eat, but you could also take and drink. I want to talk for a moment about meditation and shamanism. Meditation is a good method in combination with entheogens. For me, meditation alone just didn't cut it. During the shamanic experience, meditation is probably necessary, but it's nowhere close. If you've ever had an out-of-body experience and you try to recreate that experience by meditating, you will sit on a pillow until hell freezes over, waiting for that to happen. You may have heard the story of a man who lived by a river, and he wanted to cross the river. So he practiced his meditation until he could levitate and walk across the river. Well, this took him 40 years to master. And when he mastered this practice, Buddha was speaking in the neighborhood, and he went over to Buddha and he said, "Buddha, look what I can do, master. I can levitate and walk across the river to get to the other side." And Buddha says to him, "Well, that's great, but the bridge takes 2 minutes." And that's kind of the moral of the story, is we have to use what works. Reinventing the wheel, I don't think we have time for such a thing. I think that the people that came here passed through a very narrow filter. We are the ones who are plugged into the right outlet, and we receive the information and decide to come to things like this, and we need to go out and make these events happen on a grander scale year after year, because we can really change things. I don't think that the politicians are going to change things. They're going to keep things going the way they are, maintain the status quo, and entheogens get you thinking outside the box. So far outside the box that they're not only illegal, but they're suppressed and stomped into just this real taboo-like thing that, how do you tell your grandma about something like this? You don't. She dies with never understanding something like this. And that's why I think that the Christmas story is so important, because we can talk to people about this kind of stuff, because it's fascinating. You're not going to piss anybody off by talking about mushrooms if you approach it the right way. You don't want to say how wacky of an experience and how out of your head you got, but you might be able to drop a few hints, and Christmas is a great time to do such a thing. I'm not trying to ruin anybody's Christmas, but, So the shamanic experience, this will pry open your third eye. The energy climbs your chakras, and it will open your third eye system, and that's important. That's something that you, it's said you can do that with meditation. Again, that just didn't cut it for me. You can do it in one evening if you apply the right method. But here is the chakra system, or the kundalini rising, so to speak, and it rises into your crown chakra. And this has been suppressed as well, but it's been hidden right in front of your face. The caduceus is the symbol for medicine, and the older medicines were all plant-based. Today, you don't even get medicine from your doctor, who is supposed to be a medicine man. You have to go to a pharmacist and say, my doctor says I should have this, and they give you this pill that is sold for profit. That's not right. That's not the way that it should be. The plant-based, go see Bouncing Bear Botanicals. These guys will talk to you about how to find medicinals in nature. So anyway, this is the caduceus. Kind of looks a little like a tree. Maybe it was hidden in religion as well. In Egypt, they have the winged sun disk. Well, here's the nub, or the pineal gland, and the left and right hemispheres of the brain, the wings, and the two serpents. So even the winged sun disk is a stylized caduceus, symbolizing the kundalini. Now the kundalini, the yogic life force, is said to lie coiled at the base of the spine until it is aroused and sent to the head to trigger enlightenment. And there are many different ways of depicting this, but usually you'll see for the initiated artist, a red and blue snake climbing the spinal system and opening up the two wings, which are the left and right hemispheres of the brain. An open chakra system. The medicine man. I never really put two and two together until last year, and all I could do was search for images of these headbands, and they all have, or the headdresses, and they all have this idea of opening up your consciousness. Okay, Pentecost. What happens at Pentecost? But the Spirit floats down onto man and hovers over their head, the flame over their head. That's another way of symbolizing this open shamanic consciousness. I'll talk about Pentecost in a minute as well. Yeah, the halos as well. So at Pentecost, if you've ever heard of Dr. Rick Strassman, he mentions this in his book, DMT, the Spirit Molecule. There's a very interesting link between Buddhism, Christianity, and reality. The 49 days after Jesus was resurrected, if you think of dying and being sent somewhere into the abyss, 49 days after this happened in the religious and Christian story was Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit comes back down to man. After meditating for 49 days underneath a tree, Gautama reached enlightenment and became the Buddha. So there's another 49-day link. 49 days after conception, the pineal gland spontaneously appears in the human fetus, and we sexually diversify on this day. Our fingers and toes begin to develop, our eyes close for the first time, and we become conscious. So it's like there is this, at death, a host is conceived. And for 49 days, our spirit is going through the bardo. And on this 49th day, our spirit enters into that host that's just been waiting for us, and we reincarnate. There's a link between stress and DMT. Might be missing a slide. Oh, so in the 49 days in the Bardo that we spend, there's a link between stress and DMT, whereas an intense, stressful experience will stimulate the pineal gland into producing DMT. Death, I hear, is pretty stressful. Birth is pretty stressful. So we have this link to shamanic consciousness via dimethyltryptamine, which I'll talk about just a little bit more in depth. We're born psychedelic, we die psychedelic, and we should live psychedelic. Again, DMT, the Spirit Molecule, great book. If you don't have it, get it and read it. It'll change the way that you see this world, I promise. DMT is called, it's abbreviation for dimethyltryptamine. It's a very powerful psychedelic. It's a prototype of its class, and it's chemically related to LSD. It exists in nature, and it exists in our bodies, in our brains, in our cerebral spinal fluid. And according to Dennis McKenna, who's going to speak on this stage tomorrow, I think, it's easier to find a plant in nature that contains DMT than to find a plant in nature that doesn't. I asked him, can you find DMT in plants? And he said, sure. It's a lot easier to find one that does than doesn't. So it's chemically related to LSD. 4 LSD-like compounds exist in humans. This is from the Boston Globe, 1978. So this is old news, but a lot of people don't know about DMT or what it is. There's an interesting way to stimulate DMT in our bodies without the use of drugs, believe it or not. So I said before that go to the source, find the path that the shaman has already walked and stay on it, but this is interesting enough to mention. Light isolation. People are locking themselves in a dark room, and this is done with help. You have a nurse to take care of you, so to speak. Someone feeds you and so forth and so on, but zero light. Not closing the blinds, but zero light. Not even the light from the moon is required for this experience. And after 14 days, it is said that your brain will produce DMT, and you will have this experience where some people report being able to see in pitch black, and they're wondering if they're seeing in infrared, but they can run across the room and touch someone when there is absolutely no light in the room. So the pineal gland is responsible for our melatonin production. Melatonin follows a 24-hour rhythm based on the sun, and if you remove the sun, if you remove the light, it will trick your brain into producing different chemicals. One of them is pinealine, and this happens at around day 10. So you go from melatonin to pinealine to DMT to 5-MeO-DMT. Melatonin is a tryptophan. So tryptophan is so easily converted into DMT that it can happen anytime. You go from a tryptophan to a tryptamine to dimethyltryptamine, just like that. So the tryptophans they exist in nature everywhere too, but they're not psychedelic. DMT is one of the most psychedelic substances that have ever been found. So this could be a link into what was happening in the pyramids, in the cave initiations, where the initiate would go into the cave and come out an adept, seeing the light, so to speak, when there is no light, through this initiation. Mercury was the messenger of the gods. I see the mushrooms as the same thing. The messengers of the gods is the way to communicate with something else. Psilocybin speaks to you. If you've ever had the experience, it sounds silly to say it, but there's a voice that is talking to you, and where is it coming from? So here's Mercury carrying the caduceus, carrying the symbol for drugs, with the wings on his head, flying into the heavens. Again, so cerebral spinal fluid is the protective layer. It's this blue layer here around the brain. Our brain is literally floating in this stuff, and cerebral spinal fluid contains DMT. So, and oh, by the way, DMT is illegal, and our brains manufacture it. So you're all carrying. So the ventricle system is here in the middle, and our brains are floating in DMT right now. Strassman says that this is very well established. I showed you the slide earlier that DMT exists in all humans. And here it is again, the ventricle system. Now the ventricle system is the manufacturing system for the cerebral spinal fluid. So this is where it comes from, and if you look at it a little closer, you see the third eye, the eye of Ra, the eye of Horus. To me, that's blatant. If you agree with me, come talk to me later, because a lot of people think I'm crazy for showing this slide, but it's not a razorback. So here's the slide again that I showed at the very beginning. And the artist is an initiated artist, obviously. Here are the mushrooms. I said we walk the wrong path, and we come back and we take the shamanic path. This path is littered with mushrooms. Here is the caduceus, the serpent climbing with the two wings, and the wise owl as the nub at the very top of the caduceus. So this is a modern day artist. This stuff isn't a secret. If you know how to draw, go out and do this stuff yourself. 4 of the books that have really changed my life are right here. Well, this one's changed my life because I wrote it. But DMT, the Spirit Molecule by Rick Strassman, Magic Mushrooms in Religion and Alchemy by Clark Heinrich. And one name that I haven't mentioned is Patrick Harding, Dr. Patrick Harding. I'm shooting a new film about the Christmas story, and he's the go-to guy for this stuff. He lives in Sheffield, England, and he lectures on this same topic, minus the DMT, minus the promotion of entheogens. Just the facts with him, but that's all you really need. If you know the rest yourself, that's great. So our new film is coming out hopefully by the end of the year. We're shooting for Christmas, cross my fingers. But all of this stuff, if you don't believe some guy at the Coalescence Festival telling you, there's a doctor that lectures all over the country in the UK talking about the very same thing. So that's pretty cool. We've got a few other people in the film. Dennis McKenna is going to be in it. Timothy Freak and Peter Gandy are in it. It's going to be a two-part film about shamanism, sacred plants, and Christmas. So look forward to that by the end of the year. I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for Bouncing Bear Botanicals. So thank you guys, Dan. You guys rock. They're sponsoring the film, and they've paid for everything. So these guys are hooked into this community. So go support them. That's really all that I have. I think I kind of blew through this a little quick. If you guys want to talk to me after this, come do so. So that's all I have. Thank you very much.